entire thing. So you know what? If you don't mind an extra minute, we're gonna
Well,
restart.
I'm
All
good.
right, let's start. All right. Hello, ladies and germs. You know this is Dr. Felder. You're listening to It Came from the Radio, and I'm here with Mark Jamilkowski, the author of Road to Moresco. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, thank you very much. I seem to have some peanut butter in my mouth today, so I'm gonna actually read the summary to his book, Road to Moresco. Let's see if I can get through it. This is take two. All right. Now, the summary at the turn of the 20th century, Maria Luisa Moresco was not like most Italian women of her time. She was driven to achieve her professional aspirations when others looked for a happy and healthy family and a peaceful environment to call home. But when multiple tragedies struck, earthquakes and storms, unexpected deaths, wars and invasions, broken relationships, even murders, she and later her daughter Chiara were forced to find a way forward despite their irreplaceable losses. Against the backdrop of a Europe in constant turmoil, they determined that hard work was unavoidable and favorable connections helped. Yet something else mattered more, their persistence and resilience. Mark Jamilkowski took a long journey full of twists and turns to discover more about these astounding, complicated, talented women via the road to Moresco. He
Okay.
tells their awe-inspiring stories in fiery detail. In the end, he learned something amazing about himself. Maybe you will too. You're invited to come along. All right.
Quite a mouthful. You did an excellent job.
So now, what inspired you to write this novel?
I actually got to meet Kiara, the daughter, and as a process of learning more about her life and who her mother was and the things they lived through, initially she would tell me things. I'd be like, really? Did that really happen? And I would go off and I'd read a book or I'd do some investigation and do some web crawling and I find out basically what kinds of things were going on. It was all fascinating because in essence, it was sort of a human element
Hmm.
to a lot of the history and historical facts that we may have learned in school, but we gloss over, you know, and it kind of put a human face to a lot of the intricate things that were going on during those time periods. And here I was talking with this woman and learning more about her. In as much as that was fascinating, I also learned that our paths had crossed
I,
as a result of basically being blocks away from each other at a certain point in our lives,
hmm,
right?
hmm.
Um, she was raising her family. I was a young child playing in the park with my father, throwing a baseball. We were literally a few blocks away from each other in New Haven, Connecticut at that time. And it was just fascinating to me that, here we were, two strangers that just happened to meet, and I got to meet her and come to find out that we were literally like at the same corner deli at the same time,
Wow.
20 years, would have been 40 some odd years ago, right? So it was fascinating to go through that and to see how our lives had almost collided and all the things that she had gone through in her life. And, um, I sat down one day and I said, I got 18 pages of notes
Wow.
trying to keep track of everything. It's too many facts and details and whatnot, and I couldn't necessarily keep it all straight. So I I was keeping notes, and as I read a book about XYZ, I would take more notes, and I had all
Hmm.
these notes, and I was like, 18 pages of notes, 10 pages of written text per page of notes. Maybe I got something here that a ghostwriter would be able to take and run with.
Ah, okay. So did you find a ghostwriter?
No,
Right.
I have reached out to people and asked them, would you be a ghostwriter? Would you read
Uh-huh.
this? Let me know. Do you think it's interesting? Would other people
Mm-hmm.
be interested in this story? Or should I just like run this through the copy machine at Kinko's, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
showing my age, FedEx, and then give it to the family and as a Christmas present and be done with it, right? And they're like, no, no, no. not only am I not going to ghostwrite this for you, it's something you have to write.
Why did they say that?
They saw something in what I had put together at that point in time that I guess they were just encouraging me to explore my artistry as an author. And because I'm not an author, I'm not, yeah, this is the first book I've ever published. Um, I'm in my mid upper 50s, so this is a brand new thing. Didn't go to school for this, but they felt I was a great storyteller.
Yeah, you read someone's notes and you can decipher whether or not they can write it. And most of the time, if they can write, I say you write it yourself because you get a whole other story. And I told this to someone recently who wanted to get their story done. I said, you got to monitor if someone's going to write it for you. And they didn't monitor. They got a whole story, I think like 500 pages or so. And it's not what you
What they
wanted.
want is, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, back to you. So now, perfect lead into my next question. What are some things you needed to learn in order to complete this book as a new writer?
Oh, well, yeah. First off, I didn't know it was called a manuscript. So
All right.
language, in terms of the language of the industry, you have a manuscript. Do you need an agent?
Hmm.
I didn't know, and I didn't go with an agent. I ended up finding a wonderful woman who invested time and energy into me as an independent publisher, who really gave me lots of guidance and all types of editorial tricks. Editorial tricks. Next thing you have to learn things
Hmm.
like, because I framed this story, well, sure, it's biography. Maria Luisa, a real person. Yes, she was married to Max Strub, also a real person. Kiara was born to Maria Luisa from a previous lover before she met Max, also a real person, right? These are all, and everything that happens with their lives and the history, all real stuff. But there is fiction necessary in order to weave it all together, because there's just some things we don't know, right? So
Hmm.
fiction fills in the gaps. Phrasing it and forming it as historical fiction, then I fell into the traps. I didn't even know they existed, but evidently I overused the word had. I
Okay.
overused the word was,
All right.
uh,
Had was.
would have, those types of things.
So what'd you do to replace had and was and would have?
Oh my gosh, it was a very long and laborious effort. But,
Interesting.
you search in Word, 741 instances of the word had. All right, well, I got that down to 112. 600 some odd instances of the word was. We got that down to something more reasonable as well. It becomes a crutch relying on those words.
I see. I
Now
see.
I'm aware of it. To some extent, I feel not being aware of those types of constructs allowed me to write more freely and allowed me to
Mm.
write it very quickly.
Okay.
Um, and I
But
was
then you had to
able
go back.
to head back. Right. It was a stream of consciousness effort. It was just kind of like coming out of me as I was looking at my notes and writing the story out, and kind of stumbling upon the fact that I needed a bridge chapter between two chapters I thought were obvious, but it's like, wait, no, you just jumped forward like 25 years. You need, what happened?
All
It's
right.
that type of, those types of things. So organization of the story, flow, there's a whole bunch of learning that came out of this that was, I think, probably very indicative of the finer points of bringing something that was a side project and an interesting fireside story into something which could be classified as a novel. And
All right.
that was a big transition to make that move.
All right. Now, this is only a 10-minute interview, so we're actually nearing the end. We only got a few minutes left.
I'm sorry.
Now, no, it's all right. It's I do this all the time, so I know the pacing. If every answer is like 30 seconds to 90 seconds, we get all through all the questions. That's okay. We'll just get through a few questions today. It's all right. I'm flexible. Dr. Feldy's flexible. Now, you chose to write about women in the early 1900s?
It starts in the early 1900s,
Okay,
correct?
just making sure. Now, what traits did those women from the past encompass that maybe you wish were in more women today?
Actually, I think that Maria Luisa had a more modern perspective relative to her
Hmm.
peers. Italy during the 1920s, 1930s was swept up in this whole nationalism and fascism, where people were falling in line, if you will, behind the
Hmm.
national flag and everything, all the fervor associated with anything Mussolini wanted to do, and that would boost the national pride.
Mm.
Um, this wasn't of interest to her. She had her own personal professional career that she wanted to pursue. She wanted to be a concert pianist, and this is what she went to go do, or as much as she could anyway. Um, there was a bravery and a resilience and a uh, uh, just a strength to her, which was captivating for me. And I tried to convey that as best I could in the written word. Um,
Interesting.
I think there's a lot of people like that now.
Hmm.
It may not have been so common back then, though.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Maybe we'll see this in a movie one day. We'll see. Now, final question.
I did
And
write a
now,
script for a graphic novel, so that's a future project.
all right. Okay. Interesting. Thinking. The wheels are turning. But you can't see inside my brain and listeners can't hear it. So we'll have to move on to the next question. Now, 1 minute or less, what advice would you give your 20-something-year-old self?
Start the journey earlier.
Start the
Don't
journey
wait.
earlier. Don't wait. That's it? That's a real short
Listen,
one.
you said you wanted the short answers in order to make your 10-minute interviews.
Uh-huh.
Uh, um, my point there being that my 20-year-old self, I was very invested in my career. I had ambitions. I had certain things that I wanted to achieve for myself in terms of life goals.
Mm,
And it wasn't until I had achieved a lot of those things, including raising a son and all these
mm.
other things, where I started to look more inside to myself. You see,
I
the road
see.
to Moresco, there is a town in Italy called Moresco. So there
Okay.
is a physical attribute. There is, in fact, a road that will lead you to the town of Moresco. And it is, in fact, the town where Maria Luisa was born, and the story has its genesis. The Road to Moresco as a title on the book, however, is also somewhat allegorical because reading it and writing it brings you on a
All
journey.
right. All
It's a
right.
journey of self-discovery. It's a journey of a more introspection that impacts how you interact with other people as well. So it's an internal to external kind of transformation that takes place as you travel that journey.
All right. Now to close out the interview, will you just tell us, our readers and myself, where we could find you, your Instagrams, your handles, your OnlyFans, whatever you have.
I am on Twitter, Road to Moresco. Um, Amazon is where you can get the book, obviously, The Road to Moresco. And then markjamilkowskiauthor.com is my website. It's with separated by dashes.
Maybe you could get the book on Audible and people can listen to it. Maybe you could have
Audiobook
Stallone.
is coming.
What about Stallone can narrate it, or me,
That's funny.
or Mike
Well,
Tyson?
there you go. I actually have already engaged somebody to create the audiobook. It's going to be
Ah,
available in 2 or 3 weeks.
I would rather hear The Road to Moresco by Mike Tyson. I think that would be so cool. Well, thank you so much for being on. It came from the radio and back to the studio, Mark.